if you're not willing to do this, you have two options. You can buy off the MLS, hop into bloody bidding wars and overpay for everything you buy, or you can shuffle through all the crap that wholesalers are going to send you and try to find the needle in the haystack.
Welcome to the Good Stewards podcast, the only podcast dedicated to seasoned real estate investors who want to maximize the cash flow potential in their business. We are buy and hold investors with 1,000+ properties and markets across the U.S. who bring an insider's view into the nitty-gritty details of real estate investing. If you're looking to develop the mindset, teams, and systems that can dramatically build your real estate business and net worth, you're in the right place.
Welcome to this episode of the Good Stewards podcast. I'm Ryan Dossie.
I'm Amanda Perkins.
I'm Bill Sirius.
And I'm Andrew Sirius.
One of the most important things to identify as an investor when you're deciding to kind of get into this world of sourcing your own deals, kind of direct to seller marketing, is your farm area. Where are you actually going to market to? Where are you looking for deals in? And in my experience, one of the best ways to do this is look at where everybody else is already buying. Chances are, if you're the first person or you're the only person in a particular part of town, other people may know something that you're missing. It's kind of like, imitation is the highest form of flattery. So what we're talking about doing here is kind of doing a little bit of digging, a little bit of snooping, if you will, on people in your market and where they're having success. Now, this can be for buy and hold, can be for wholesaling, can even be for flipping. And it's really pretty easy to do. This is an episode that you're probably going to want to have a pen and paper handy. I know we'll have some links for you guys, but I'm going to give you some of the kind of practical how-tos on this. So for starters, the first thing you want to figure out is who are the competitors in your market. If you're in Indianapolis, what I'm going to share with you, you can totally find out where I'm buying. So you kind of want to just make a little bit of a hit list, if you will, of people who you're interested in seeing where they're buying. There was a member on Bigger Pockets a while back that posted in the forums about a cash out refinance deal he did that he pulled out $300,000 and he wouldn't tell anybody the address and or the part of town he was in. And in using this method, I was able to find it in about 2 minutes. So once you kind of have a hit list of people that you're looking to find, you're going to go onto your Secretary of State's site. You can also use a free website called Open Corporates. And what you're able to effectively do here is search for the person's name and see what companies they own. It's a really good way to figure out what are they actually doing business kind of in and under. I was pretty surprised. A couple of guys that I knew really well had like secret LLCs that they were wholesaling or flipping out of that we were then able to backtrack and see, okay, what are all of the deals this entity has done? Once you kind of have that list of the companies that they own, you simply hop into your state's assessor site. There's another tool if you're a licensed real estate agent called Agent Pro 24/7. It's a paid tool, but you can effectively then go and search and see where they're doing deals. So it's kind of a good way to figure out for the buy and hold guys or the flippers where they're actually locking deals down. But on the flip side of this, every single person on this podcast, every single person listening should be on just about every wholesaler's email list they can find. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. This is not going to be enjoyable. I think Andrew and Bill can attest to this, but you're going to get a lot of crap before someone sends you a deal.
You just sift through a lot of garbage, but luckily you just have to press delete when they are when it's garbage, which it usually is.
Probably 90 to 95% are not worth consideration, but there are gems in the pile.
I would say even the 5% that end up working out, we don't pay their asking price, right? We're like, hey, I know you're at 140. I'm at 98. What can we do here, right? Mm-hmm. And they can go back and retrade or whatever. But once you have kind of this list compiled, we'll take the entire thing of every deal everybody's sent out and compile it into Excel and start to look at what zip codes are the most popular. what are kind of the most common parts of the city that folks are in. We did this in my market in Indianapolis, probably 2 or 3 months ago. And we actually found that the 3 hottest zip codes amongst our competitors were zip codes we hadn't marketed to in a year. So still doing plenty of volume, but there's kind of this whole other untapped pool that we were able to then kind of hop in and add to our marketing. Now, one last thing I'll walk you through on this before we kind of move into what you should be looking for is kind of another way to do this. So if you Google, you can kind of find some tutorials on this that are a little bit more visual on YouTube, but you can go into List Source, punch in zip codes. You can do your entire city if you want. And you can do absentee-owned properties that were purchased in, say, the last 90 days that have about 100% equity. This is effectively going to be cash sales. And then List Source at the end, before you even purchase the data, this is totally free. And I'll check with our producer, but we can probably link to this below, the way you don't have to go hunting for it. You can then actually preview the data and see what zip codes these deals were done in without even having to buy anything. So it's another good way to look at, maybe not just a few competitors you're trying to see where they're at, but overall as a whole, in your market, where are absentee owners buying deals?
By the way, are you going to check with our executive producer or one of our associate producers?
I think we only have one. But, we'll pass that through legal.
Okay, fantastic.
So I know this is kind of dry starting out, but as you start to get into this, it gets extremely, extremely valuable.
So I would just leapfrog on that point because it's also not just it's not this particular method. It's a mindset. It's like kind of looking where things are. How do you figure things out? How do you find those diamonds in the rough? What are good, to kind of go back, this is very similar in its approach to what we mentioned briefly in our refinance episode. That is like going to List Source and looking up, okay, who has loaned on properties that are owned by non-owner occupants, absentee owners in this zip code at this price range in the last year. Where I want to refinance properties, which banks have lent there. And, getting that list from List Source is one way to find potential lenders. Well, this is kind of a similar approach to finding good markets to buy in. And if you can kind of integrate that into your mindset, generally speaking, we might not have the exact thing to give you, the exact information, the exact process to follow for what you're looking for. But when you have that mindset, you can take it and use it and use that as your framework for whatever you're looking to accomplish.
Yeah, I think there's really two prevailing mindsets I see with investors. There's the I'm just going to take action club, and then there's the other side of the diagram is I need to know everything before I dive in. And I think this is
Brett Favre
we're really in
and
the
Peyton
middle.
Manning. Sorry, I'm sorry.
we're really in the middle of you can just jump in and take action, and you can blow through a ton of money. Or you can do a little bit of research, but still take the action on it and get some serious results. I think the key takeaway from this first point is just figure out who your competitors are. Look at where people are doing deals. Now, you don't necessarily have to just resign yourself to those particular areas. Maybe that's just the hood that doesn't interest you. Fair warning, there is going to be hoodier zip codes in there because it's where people are able to buy distressed properties left and right. We own quite a bit of stuff that really wouldn't show up on that list because we're newer built, nicer areas, which I think kind of leads us into point 2, which is going to be what data we're really looking for to build marketing lists. And I think the first kind of myth I just want to absolutely crush here is that, financial distress, divorce, job transfer, this kind of stuff isn't limited to middle class or rougher parts of town. socioeconomic issues, they don't pay attention to income brackets of like, oh, this guy makes $250,000 a year, so we'll just leave him alone. I would actually argue, in my experience from all the marketing I've done, I've seen a lot more people get in trouble a lot faster that are in nicer parts of town, simply because their burn rate is significantly higher.
But don't you think that most people in our society are living on the edge financially? So they're not unlike our country, who's living on the edge financially. And unfortunately, we haven't learned the lessons of modesty, propriety, appropriateness in terms of our finances. And so many of us are one paycheck away, or maybe two paychecks away from getting into real trouble. And that happens all the time. Life is messy and stuff happens. So, sadly, people are fragile financially, and they need to make quick decisions sometimes as a result of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say most of our nicer deals that we have bought have come from either like a difficult, we call them DLSs, like a difficult lifestyle situation, which could be divorce, could be job transfer. We have difficult financial situations, which could be like bankruptcy, pre-foreclosure, laid off, that kind of stuff. Or the other bracket, which there's a ton of these, is people that are just simply affluent. They don't want to deal with it. They want to hit the easy button. We just did one of these in Indianapolis in October of 2019. And it was a class, like credible neighborhood. Lady initially called us wanting about $300,000. We told her, hey, you can probably get it. Just list on the MLS. She was like, no, I don't want to deal with that. I don't want people in my house. Make me an offer. We ended up buying the property for $205,000. We put about 5 to 7 into it. We ended up all in, holding costs, everything, for right about $215K. And we sold it for $265,000 cash on the MLS. This lady did not need to sell to us. She was not behind on her property. She had plenty of equity. She just didn't want to have to deal with it, wanted to get a check, pay off her mortgage, and be able to move down where it's warmer. For anybody who lives in Indiana or the Midwest, I'm sure you can resonate with that this time of year. So there's not necessarily like a big, like, there doesn't have to be some sort of a desperation for somebody to sell at a discounted rate. And I think that's important to touch on. I hear a lot of people talk about like, oh, well, none of my sellers are motivated, or these leads aren't motivated. I was talking with a buddy of mine who does a lot of off-market deals as well. And we kind of came up with the theory that you're not really looking for motivated sellers. You're just looking for reasonable people. Like, these are people that you can simply explain, here's where you're at, here's where we're at, here's why we're your best option, and see if it's something they consider. They don't necessarily have to be like bank knocking. In my experience, and I think Bill and Amanda, you guys can touch on this quite a bit, a lot of the times the people who are in the worst financial positions, auction is scheduled, notice has been hammered to the door, they like just bury their head in the sand and pretend it's not going on until the day before the auction.
Absolutely. The other thing that I was going to touch on about how you talked about, the different socioeconomics, I think there's a little bit to do with some of that, like, for instance, the deal you were talking about in Indy with hassle factor. To go on the MLS, people get really hung up on, I got to do everything right. It's got to be perfect, blah, blah, blah. I have to, stage it, all of this. And there's some people that are just like, I'm willing to take the hit to just walk away. And, if you, maybe it's, like, I'm going to walk away from $50,000, but I'll find another way, a better use of my energy to make it. I don't know if that plays into it, but I think it plays into it a little bit.
No, I think that's a good point. Because we've noticed in higher income areas, a lot of the times it is kind of the hassle factor, the X factor is why they sell to us. Whereas in lower income areas, it tends to be like, what is the dollar amount I'm getting? Like, I have, we had one recently that fell apart at the closing table, came back and they had we were buying the property for $50,000 and they had $50,000 in judgments. And they were like, wait, you're not going to pay all those too? No, like, those are your bills, not mine. But you kind of run into, I think in like more distressed areas, B and C class neighborhoods, we run into a lot more where it's pretty much like we're paying off their mortgage, some debt, and they're walking with a couple grand. And I think that couple grand they're walking with in the clean slate is what gets the deal done, not the fact that, we're going to take it as is and they can have cash in 2 weeks or whatever.
I think for folks who are in distress, I go back to the 5 stages of death and dying. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote that book, and she wrote it regarding terminally ill patients that go through these 5 stages, but they apply across the board anytime you have a loss in your life. It could be the death of a loved one. It could be financial hardship. It could be even that you lost respect in your job situation, but you go through the stages and they're first denial, then bargaining, and then anger, depression, and finally, sometimes you get to acceptance of your situation and your state. And I think people in financial distress, and I know myself in the past when I've had the loss of something key in my life, I've gone through those same stages, and it's not like you just blow through these stages. It's kind of circular kind of experience. You go from one to another and then the other, and sometimes you don't get to acceptance. Sometimes you do, but I sense when I'm talking to people in distress that they're in one of those stages, and oftentimes
a lot of denial.
Oftentimes it's not acceptance. It might be a combination of some of the others. They're angry at the bank. They're angry at the universe. They've bargained their way this way and that, but there is a huge amount of denial. And I think gently as we can, when we do interact with folks in this situation, we need to try to break those walls down and say, we have a solution. We have a, we're kind of moving away from data here into dealing with the people that we find from that data, but that we're here to help them and not to exploit their situation. So
I think to tag onto that and kind of pull us back towards the data piece. When you're marketing to folks that are in more distress, these are more niche list type of scenarios, you want to make sure that you don't mention that before they admit it. Right. Reason being, if you have somebody who's angry and you send them a letter that's like, hey, I hear you're losing your house to a foreclosure, they're not going to call you and be like, wow, can you just help me out of this? They're going to be like, no, screw this guy. And that's how you get a whole bunch of 1-star reviews online or, negative pushback. We've even had deals where one of our rules internally is we don't look at how we got a deal until that deal closes. That way, if they ask us, we can answer honestly. We had a deal that it was an inheritance property, and the seller was like, why did you mail me? We're like at the table, we've agreed on price, getting ready to sign the contract. Why did you mail me? And I was able to look him, straight in the eyes and be like, honestly, I don't know. We do a lot of marketing, reach out to a lot of folks. I'm not sure. He's like, well, I just wanted to make sure you didn't pick me just because you knew my dad died. Now, chances are that's how he ended up on our list, but everybody else sent him these letters that was like, had just inappropriate BS in it. Like, I'm sorry for your loss. I don't know you. I don't want to hear that from you. So to kind of wrap up this point and kind of where you should be looking for this kind of data, your absolute best bet is going to be to go to your courthouse and see what you can get. Some of them make this super easy of like, oh yeah, here's all of our divorces. Other ones you have to have like case numbers or names. Some of it you can do online, but a lot of investors make the mistake of looking for the easy button here with their data. And I'll give you guys a really good example. We decided we wanted to add in, after buying a couple, folks who had filed bankruptcy. We bought a couple deals and noticed this is kind of a recurring theme that's coming up in our sellers. And this buddy of mine was like, hey, I know a broker who's great for this. Get in touch with the guy. And he's like, yeah, it's $2 a lead. I'm like, whew. Feels a little steep. I normally pay 3.5 cents a name, not $2, but okay. And I start asking around, and another buddy of mine was like, well, no, there's this other tool called PropStream that you can actually see everybody who's filed bankruptcy in your county, and you can export up to 10,000 names for $99 a month. It's like, wow, that's a little bit of a better deal. So we started looking into it, and there was, I think it was about 8,000 or 9,000 people in our market that had recently filed for bankruptcy that we went ahead and added to kind of our marketing channels. The reason you really want to look into and start to kind of dive into this world while executing on it does you no good if you just look into it and do nothing with it. This is really about testing hypotheses. Hypotheses?
I think you got it right.
That's my high school dropoutness there, but you know what I mean. You want to test your theories, and if it works, great. If it doesn't, mark it as a learning lesson and try something different. It's constantly about coming up with a theory, testing it, and then measuring the results. This is how you find niche lists. It's going to be how you find deals. And if you're not willing to do this, you have two options. You can buy off the MLS, hop into bloody bidding wars and overpay for everything you buy, or you can shuffle through all the crap that wholesalers are going to send you and try to find the needle in the haystack. Neither of those are really great options. This is a podcast, so I think we can admit that we're not, perfect. I had a business partner early on in Indiana, great guy, super ethical. Was a business partner in my wholesaling business. And when I started doing buy and hold, he started to get pretty upset because he wanted to get paid on deals I was keeping, because if we were going to wholesale it, he could have made money on it. And, I had to sit there and really think about it. And okay, if I pay this guy $2,500 per building I buy, what is that going to look like long term? And I ultimately we ended up deciding, hey, this just isn't a good fit anymore. And to be pretty frank, I'm pretty glad we did, because it would have lowered my equity position in my portfolio by $250,000 to $500,000, which that's a lot of money, right? So typical wholesaler, if you're looking at one of their deals, there's good wholesalers and there's bad wholesalers. So when I wholesale, to be blunt, my average profit's about $16,000 a deal. So if you're buying that deal from me because you didn't want to source it yourself, you're paying me about a $16,000 markup over what I would pay if I was finding that deal myself. And I don't share that to brag or oh, we're making so much money, but I share that to really show you my typical cost per acquisition on a deal is about $2,000, $2,500 is what I'm spending on marketing to get that deal. Now we've got this pretty dialed in. A lot of investors are going to spend closer to $5,000 to $7,500 to get an off-market deal. But I've got people that are paying me $16,000 for my effort in finding them that deal. Don't get me wrong, it's a mutually beneficial relationship. They don't want to do the work and we're still selling them the property at a good deal. But you look at if you buy, say, 10 properties from a wholesaler and their average markup is $15,000, I'm sure you'd much rather have an extra $125K in equity.
Yeah, I think that the skills of data are similar to the skills of programming. And many of the great companies of the world that are computer oriented have begun by programmers. Those programmers have had then to incorporate other people around them to fill in gaps because they're so mathematically oriented. And they're not necessarily business oriented or relationally oriented. But I guess my question to you, Ryan, and to the rest of us, I feel like that's where I'm coming from as an investor, and I bet you some of the people listening are as well. I'm kind of math phobic and also, as a, kind of similarly, a little data phobic. And I know the value of what you've just discussed so much that we have to be direct to seller buyers. And the way to do that is through exercising the kind of data screening that you've talked about, Ryan. But is there a way for us data phobic folks to not have to be relegated to the pile of investors buying off the MLS or from wholesalers? What can we do?
Yeah. So, I think that's the easy button, right? So it's kind of like what we talked about with the sellers. There are people who make their money selling the shovels. You can buy an absentee owner list with equity from ListSource. For anybody who's listening, I typically do 35 to 100% in equity. That's enough where they can afford to sell to me in my experience. And that's a great list. We get a deal for about every 1,500 to 2,000 pieces of mail we send to it. That is the easy button option. But when we start to look at some of this more niche stuff is where you get better deals in better parts of town with better margins. And your cost per acquisition, how much money you have to spend to get a deal, can dive dramatically. We had a list we pulled of like 1,400 people that we pulled 6 deals out of. Was insane. But we went through the legwork of, on the front end, digging into these public records, this kind of data, and figuring out what could potentially, the way I look at this, the question you should ask yourself is, what's something that I can see that's public records that's going to make somebody even remotely have an inkling of wanting to sell their property? Divorce, probate, pre-foreclosure, job loss, mechanics lien. They hired work and didn't pay the person. They have an IRS tax lien. They haven't paid their taxes on their property. You look at this stuff of kind of, what are some things that could add pressure to a person where they're looking for a way out of it, and then test and try and retest. So I think if you're in Bill's position, if you're a little, data phobic to it, you can buy one of these niche lists, or you can buy deals from wholesalers. Now, don't get me wrong. There's wholesalers out there that, quite frankly, don't value their time like I do. Bill or Andrew, you can talk about, you guys had a ridiculous deal you bought from a wholesaler. It was like multiple properties who I think's total assignment fee was like $3,000.
We've had a decent number of wholesalers that we've purchased from. My experience generally has been the best wholesalers, the ones that you get good deals from, are the ones that you get in with and go to you before they put it out to the market. Once it's been emailed out, very rarely do we get one. But we have decent luck with the wholesalers who know we close, and they send us deals right off the bat, and like, hey, because wholesalers have to deal with, I'm sure you've had this problem, Ryan, in buyers who talk a big game and then don't have the money to close.
We just sued one.
And then you have to delay the closing and push back or whatever. So if they know you're gonna close, and you can close quickly, 15, 20 days, they send in to call you before they send out to anybody else. And by far our best deals with wholesales, it's not even close. And by far the most wholesale deals are from wholesalers like that. The ones that call us beforehand are the ones that we get. Other than that, it's just sifting through, and hey, that one actually makes sense. And so we bought 3 a little while ago. I'm not exactly sure how much the wholesale was on one. I mean, I've seen wholesale profits range from, I saw one on a deal that wasn't any good for us, where the wholesaler made, I think, $1,500. And one that was a great deal for us, where the wholesaler made $30,000. So they had to split it between 2 of them. But still, so it's like, it's not so much how much the wholesaler makes, it's how good the deal is. But with regards to wholesalers, it's really about getting in tight with a couple good ones, is my experience.
I think the deal that Ryan might be referring to is the one where you bought 9 houses and the wholesale fee was $2,500 for that.
That's a terrible business model for the guy who sold you the deals, but great for you guys. I think one thing I really do want to drive home on this point, if you don't want to get your hands dirty with data, you'd better treat people with respect. I get a huge kick out of all of these people that love to just drag wholesalers through the mud, pretend they're the scum of the earth. And then these are the guys that via email are begging us for deals. Like, please, can you just give me this one? I need one. We had a guy recently who was pissed that somebody beat him out on a deal. He was like, well, you should just sell it to me because, we're going to build a relationship. And with somebody who went around and was then bad mouthing us that we wouldn't sell to him. But this is somebody who routinely online trashes people that he's then going around and begging for, please sell me a deal. So, there's kind of this anti-wholesaler sentiment. And it's like any industry where you can make money. You're going to have people who are good actors and you're going to have people who are bad actors. But if you are data phobic or don't want to dive into this, because this is a whole nother business. You're talking acquisitions people, running appointments, making offers, coordinating closings. If you don't want to set up kind of this front end business, you'd better treat the people who are doing the legwork with some respect, or they're never going to sell you anything. And this is a pretty small, it's a pretty small niche. There's not a lot of investors, especially in the buy and hold world, that are going direct to seller. And those of us that do, we all chat. So, you default on a deal, you pull out for some reason. I saw a post recently on Facebook where some guy was trying to get out of his contract because the neighbor had pit bulls. And it was like, I'm pretty sure there wasn't a line item in your inspection contingency stating what kind of breed of dog is next door, right? So,
hey Ryan,
treat people with respect.
One question I think maybe you could address before you end is, so what do you send out? You got the data, you've got the names that you want to, send something to. What is it that you send?
Yeah. So good question. And I'm not going to plug my companies because they're easy enough to find. Although I appreciate the layup. So what I would say is I'm totally against dishonest marketing. And what I mean by that is anything that is misleading, creates a false sense of urgency, or is quite frankly just false. A lot of these pieces are super popular in like the postcard world of like, third notice, your cash offer is expiring, when it's like, you didn't send me notices 1 and 2, right? Another one I get is like, I've tried everything I can to find you, and I'm just so distraught because I need to buy a property this month. And it's like, you Google my name and you can find my phone number real easily, right? Or I think my least favorite of all the marketing pieces is my wife and I are new to the neighborhood, and here's a picture of smiling little Johnny, and we just want to make sure he's in a good school district. And it's like, bro, I know you buy 50 houses a year. Like, come on. And people really see through kind of that crap. So my approach, we try to do everything how to win friends and influence people based. So, we're not sending this like, your cash offer is expiring. You're like, well, I can only buy 1 deal this month. Like, nobody believes that crap. Our approach is much more conversational. Hey, dear John and Sarah, what are your plans for 123 Main Street? I've prepared a cash offer I'd like to discuss with you. Please give my office a call at phone number when you get this. Thanks. It's much more like, here's my intention. Here's what I'm wanting. Give me a call. Now, I will say kind of on that note, make sure if you're going to go through the effort of doing marketing, that you pick up your calls, that you run your appointments, that you make your offers. I can't tell you how many people I've seen that like spend thousands of dollars on the front end, and then the leads come in and they'll prejudge them of like, oh, well, that person doesn't sound desperate enough, so I'm not going to call them back. Or, ooh, that guy's voice sounded a little angry in his voicemail, so we'll pass on that one. Like, if you don't have thick skin, look on the MLS or buy deals from wholesalers, to put it in a nutshell.
Yeah. And one other category of buying deals, just to mention this, is investment-minded real estate agents. And there's certainly a difference between a typical real estate agent who works with homeowners looking for a dream home for them, and an investment-minded real estate agent who knows your criteria. You have to buy wholesale. They realize you're going to be tough in negotiation, but you're going to be a volume buyer, and you're going to do what you say you're going to do. So they're out there kicking the tires all the time and talking to other brokers and bringing something to you before they put it on the MLS or bring it to somebody else.
I would say that's still kind of your needle in the haystack. A lot of quote investment-minded realtors aren't. So, make sure you're still running your own comps. Just
Absolutely.
Because a real estate agent tells you it's a, tremendous investment opportunity doesn't mean that it is. So, it's always kind of one of those trust but verify things. Like, as we're kind of wrapping up here, just real quickly to touch on kind of how do you organize this data? And for most people, like, you don't need to get into like SQL databases or anything like that. Honestly, just kind of combining it in Excel and looking for patterns. One real basic thing that I recommend on all of your lists, make sure that you combine multiple owners. So for instance, if John Smith, Sarah Smith own a house, 99% of investors only mail the letter to John Smith. As somebody who owns an answering service that takes thousands of calls, I can't tell you how many calls we get that's like, well, this is my house too. And it's like, that's how the conversation starts out. So it's one of those really small things, but we always address our letters and our mail pieces to both people that are on title, if there's multiple people on title. So kind of quick little actionable pro tip there. So I think with that being said, we're going to kind of wrap this one to a close. This is definitely one that I would check out on thegoodstewards.com because we are going to link back to several of these tools. I want to thank you for tuning in. If it's something you liked, be sure to like and subscribe. Also, feel free to shoot in questions. We love answering those for you guys. That's what we're here for. We're here to interact with you. Be sure to head over to thegoodstewards.com for more info and to connect with us. Talk to you next time.